gathered out there from all corners of the earth. It's so lovely, such a pleasure to be here, and such a wonderful opportunity to get to grips with some of the big challenges. That's an omen. The big challenges for community developments and for society as a whole. I'll tell you, listening to the earlier parts, such wonderful ideas, such wonderful music, and such a sense of place. I used to live up the road in Montrose many years ago. And I'll tell you something, if it gets much worse in England, we're going to be knocking at the door to let us back in again up here. So today, I've come to tell you a story. Now that's not a soft option, you know. Think back to Paulo Freire, and he influenced radical community development, always saying that the answers to everything lie in the stories that people tell. When I was a grassroots community worker, it was Freire who changed me totally as a practitioner. He came alive, he brought my practice alive. I was able to see all those theories and concepts alive in the way things were in community. But he also taught me that understanding political power and social change, it's all around us, in everyday stories that people tell us. So at this point, I want to emphasize community development is an intellectual and a practical activity. It's a spiritual and an emotional activity, and it's a really deeply personal and profoundly political activity. So today I want to concentrate on the political dimensions of our practice. So here we go. Here's a story of power, politics, and the challenges for community development. Now, I've chosen to tell you this particular story because it's proved to be one of the most compelling stories ever told. And I want to emphasize this because we've been pretty hopeless at developing critique of our political context. And I have to level that at you. We have simply not been good enough. But critique itself is not enough. You have to have a story to replace the dominant story. There is no way we have come up with anything that is as compelling as the neoliberal story. And we have to do that. We have to look at constructing a counter-narrative, because facts and figures and critique just simply don't engage people. Anyway, that's enough, because I've got 20 minutes to get to a happy ending on this one, so let's go. Right. That should have been up when I said that last lot, so just imagine that, okay? And we're off on to the next one. Are you sitting comfortably? My story begins in a little village in Switzerland on the 1st of April 1947, when a group of men met to write a story to replace socialism. This new story, in time, became known as neoliberalism. Now, this little group of men were quite happy to bide their time, waiting for an opportunity to make their story popular. Never before had people come across a story that even suggested that the market could rule society. That was a very odd idea indeed. Let's roll our story forward from 1947 to 1979. Hey, this was just the opportunity they were waiting for. Margaret Thatcher appeared, became Conservative Prime Minister in the UK. She liked this story of individualism. She started telling everyone there's no such thing as society, only individuals and their families, and that it's really good to be greedy. The key plot was the free market, which put profit before people. We were told that the rich needed to get richer, but if those at the bottom of the pile tightened their belts, there would be a trickle-down effect. Guess what? Nothing ever trickled. This was the first big lie. The rich got richer and much more greedy, and the poor were called scroungers. Make people poor, pillage the earth in the name of profit was the moral of the story. There is no alternative, we were told, and it was such a good story, we all shut up and got on with it. Now, it wasn't very long before Ronald Reagan put in an appearance in 1981, and he liked this story so much, he made friends with Margaret Thatcher. Together they became the most powerful leaders in the Western world. It was such a great story, the IMF and the World Bank joined in, and now others, like Bolsonaro, have thrown their lot in as well. We began to see global structural adjustment programs, with the IMF creating a debt trap, forcing poor countries to pay back loans. This, of course, made the poorest people in the entire world suffer dreadfully. But it did make the rich richer. And so the process of neoliberal globalization took hold. And before too long, a global super rich appeared. They had more in common with each other than with their own cultures. So they bought really expensive stuff to show us all how very important they are. The secret is that people aren't naturally selfish. This is another big lie. We like to be kind to each other. We need to feel connected, and we have a natural propensity to be compassionate. The trouble is, sometimes people don't tell the truth, and the story leads to a different reality. This one has been a great big disaster. In 2018, Philip Alston visited Britain, and when he saw what was going on, he said austerity measures have violated 4 United Nations human rights agreements in relation to women, children, disabled people, and to economic human rights. Now he's a human rights lawyer and the United Nations expert on extreme poverty and human rights, so he knows what he's talking about. He said the UK is the world's 5th largest economy, with levels of child poverty that are not just a disgrace, but a social calamity and an economic disaster. Behind me, you can see some of the hard facts on this. Alston's story was very different. He said it's obvious to anyone at all who opens their eyes to see the immense growth in food banks and the queues outside them, people sleeping rough in the streets, the growth of homelessness. And more than this, the sense of deep despair in people that led the government to appoint a minister for suicide prevention. So bad were the levels of loneliness and isolation. But do you know what? The UK government obviously thinks it knows better. Said, this is just not true. Incomes are at a record high. Inequalities fallen. And universal credit is helping people back into work again. Who's telling big lies here? Before Margaret Thatcher started this story rolling in the UK, it was the second most equal country in the whole of Europe, and now it's the most unequal. In fact, Danny Dorling, speaking at Hay Festival the other day, said what we don't realise is it's the most extreme right-wing government in the whole of Europe. The trouble is, this story's got so big it's got out of hand. Other people have started telling it like it's a real truth. Trump, Boris Johnson, Farage, Bolsonaro, and many, many more. We're seeing the far right rising, and we've witnessed a decline in moral leadership. With blatant misogyny, xenophobia, and climate denial normalised. The lies have got even more extreme and extremely scary. There's a lot of us listening to stuff about going back to something great. And I ask, is this slavery? Is this inequality? What exactly are we thinking about when we talk about past greatnesses? This, I think, is white supremacy fighting back against all the progress we've made towards greater equality in the world. Hope's not lost, though, you know. Social movements are rising with brave people prepared to speak truth to power. The Occupy movement, #MeToo, Black Lives Matter, and more recently, school strikes and Extinction Rebellion. So far, my story's been about a failed system telling a great big lie that there is no alternative. The real problem, as I said in the beginning, is that we've failed to imagine a different story. Greed, competition, and exploitation alienate people from each other and from the earth. This appalling story was invented by a group of men who didn't agree with socialism not so very long ago. So surely we can come up with a counter-narrative based on cooperation and a common good, one in which everyone's included and valued in society. Values are the basis of everything, for community development and for society as a whole. They're the frame for the way that we see the world, and therefore they frame the way we act in the world. They need to be at the heart of everything we do as a system of checks and balances. Now, here's an idea for a different story with a changed lineup of key players. Let's put the sacred nature of our planet at the heart of it all. The Earth needs balance, and we're part of that balance, so we need to stop being so greedy and get ourselves in perspective. Live as part of a respectful, cooperative ecosystem in mutual balance. Society is all about diversity and inclusion. It'll be a happier place based on values of human dignity and respect. And let's turn all that business of being ruled by profit on its head once and for all. The economy should serve the interests of all the people, not just the rich. The commons have been systematically sold into private ownership for profit, and we're all poorer as a result. So let's get it back again and share things around a bit more together. Remember, the state is accountable, and keep trade fair, but always keep an eye on power. It's insidious and it creeps in wherever it gets the opportunity. Ideas are the foundation of change, as I hope my story demonstrates. And recently, new ideas from Rana Dasgupta changed my thinking a few weeks ago. He talked about the demise of the nation-state, that nation-states are in their death throes because neoliberal power is now global. In other words, it's operating at a level above nation-states. What we need, he reckons, is a society of nations, governed by a cooperative rule of law, one that will serve human and planetary well-being. The real delusion is that we can carry on as we are. It's impossible to find neoliberalism's compassionate face when its purpose is to exploit. We need a new integrated global politics, but we are just lacking the political imagination to produce the vision. Of course, you know the irony here is that the greatest example of such a system is the European Union. It's the greatest example we've got in operation today. So guess what? Neoliberalism came up with Brexit. Danny Dorling and Sally Tomlinson describe Brexit as the last gasp of the old empire. So this is a chance for a new world order based on a global level. But first, the most burning issue is our lack of imagination. So to construct a compelling counter-narrative to replace this dominant story, let's have a go right now. Imagine if we gave people money. What a fairy story. But is it? Annie Lowry says universal basic income could end world poverty right now just by changing the story we tell. Give every person, every single one of them, a basic income as their right, forever. Enough to live on without hardship. Now, this idea has been around a long time, but it's become popular again since the Occupy movement exposed the greed of the 1%. It's supported by the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's being tried out, wait for it, in Germany, the Netherlands, Finland, Canada, Kenya, Honduras, Indonesia, Morocco, Mexico, Nicaragua, the Philippines, and there's a lot of interest from India, California, and Switzerland too. There is so much available proof that it works. A project in Kenya, for instance, run by the NGO Give Directly, lifted a village out of poverty in an instant just by giving people money. It's much more effective than giving goods or services or means-tested welfare. And what a surprise. It doesn't make people lazy and work-shy. It gives them dignity, respect, and control over their lives. That's just how simple a happy ending to my story could be. So what's stopping change happening? One major challenge for community development is that failure to critique the political context. Too often engaging in surface symptoms as single issues, not going down deep enough to find the root causes of discrimination under the surface. Not only are we fragmenting oppressions, but we're totally missing the point. I'm now taking you back to Patricia Hill Collins in Black Feminist Thought in 1990, talking about there's no way you can understand the lives of black women if you don't understand overlapping, interlinking connections that link oppressions into a complex whole. She's still writing about it today. It was revolutionary. But do you know what? Community development never really got to grips with it on a level that informs practice. And now, neoliberalism has spotted intersectionality as a useful tool for maintaining dominance. Imogen Tyler, who's based at Lancaster University, I think it's with a Nuffield Scholarship, has done some brilliant work on offering us vital insights into the way that neoliberalism uses intersectionality as a fully integrated project of dominance and subordination. In other words, it is, if we look at racism, if we look at class, if we look at gender or any other difference, we're missing the point. It's one big neoliberal project of domination, and they're all interwoven together. So by using stigma to label a multiple range of social groups as the detritus of society, the wasters, the work-shy, the undeserving, this is used as a smokescreen for the excesses of the rich. Fascism pivots on racism, but it also incites hatred against a wide range of social groups as a connected, intersecting, overlapping whole, and we need to understand this. And I'd just like to say in passing a very quick word on white privilege. You may have seen Rini Edo Lodge's book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. She focuses on our white resistance to taking a long, hard look at the privileges that come our way, that give us an automatic entitlement to a better lot than if we are born non-white. She says, white privilege is instrumental to racism. It's a political ideology that favours white people at the expense of those who aren't white. We need to get to grips with that too. So my challenge here is threefold. Very briefly, 1, we need to get to grips with intersectionality as a neoliberal project which uses dehumanization to justify the excesses of the rich. We must reach to the heart of white privilege, name it and denounce it. And we must understand the need for a compelling counter-narrative rooted in values of compassion, kindness, caring, connection, cooperation, rooted in Ubuntu. So there it is. My story ends with an exciting challenge, and a challenge to community development to engage with a radical agenda with compassion at its heart. And all it takes are 7 critical steps. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it's given you food for thought.